let's discuss what's happened to you. I am
Here.
currently pointing at, rudely, your 38,
okay.
37
37
week bump.
Yeah, not a bump. It's like a mountain.
No.
Yeah.
No, you're a very compact little pregnant
That's
person.
Nice. That's the term my mother-in-law uses.
Compact?
Compact.
Yeah. Like a car.
I feel like I became a balloon overnight, but that's very kind of you to say.
No, you look amazing.
Thank you.
And especially this is a very fetching ensemble with like an accent scrunchie.
Scrunchie goes everywhere.
I didn't realize that scrunchies could be used as an accent. That's like another young person thing.
It was more than a few years ago. I don't remember where I was, but I was summer and I had a scrunchie on my wrist and someone looked at me and like, do you think you can pull that off? And I was like, yep, I do.
Someone
I
said
like
that
my
to you?
scrunchie. Yes.
Oh my God. Was it Jamie?
No, it was not.
No, Jamie would never.
It
That was
not.
just my segue for being able to bring her up.
Bring her up.
So that when I said
my
that you
very
were
famous patient.
That's right. When I said that you were her personal physician,
Yes.
that people would have context. So Everything Delicious, personal physician, joining us here on the podcast to discuss your own fertility journey.
Yeah.
It was funny.
Physicians can have their own fertility journey too.
Yes, I was obsessed with the fact that I knew that you were pregnant and that Jamie didn't know. And she kept on asking me, like, how's everything going? Is it going okay?
She was worried.
And I had to, I'm a terrible, terrible liar. I was like, yeah, things are fine. They're coming along.
I don't even think I told her. I think my sister told her.
I'm not secretive and I had to be secretive.
I have to do that all the time. All the time.
I can't.
You know how many of my like sister's friends are my patients? And I know that they're pregnant the second they take a pregnancy test 10 days after ovulation, and I have to keep that secret for like 3 months.
Do you then burst out when people tell you?
I've actually I feel like I've adopted the exact opposite. Like I don't say anything, even when like it's public. I don't even talk about it because I don't know if it's public or not.
So you treat.
So I just don't say anything.
Everything's a test.
Yeah, I just pretend I don't know, and like that I never bring it up.
That's because you're a very professional.
I have to be
physician.
Try.
Whereas people will bring up to me that someone is pregnant, and I'm like, I know, I know.
I try my best.
I'm like, tune into the podcast to learn about how it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
So, jumping into your journey.
Yes.
The podcast is mostly about fertility journeys, but I feel very lucky because now we have a doctor's perspective so that we can quiz you on not only your journey, but all of my own personal health challenges.
Oh, God.
Starting with this mole. No, I'm kidding.
Dermatology is not my area of expertise. Not for me.
God.
I'll send you to a dermatologist. I know a good one.
Okay, thank God.
That's what I can do.
I just need to send them all the pictures.
Yes.
Because
they get lots of pictures, I'm sure.
I think I've extended my welcome with a few other patients. I'm like, what about this one? Does that one look normal? Do you see the change? I've like drawn around it. Patients
this like tiny 1 millimeter.
That's
change.
Right. They're like, this is not my phone number anymore. Please.
Please stop.
Please leave me alone. So when you started your journey, where would you say that began?
I think very briefly it probably began in 2014 or 2015. I had been on the pill for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure I went on it because of cramps, though I don't really even remember.
Right.
And there became a time on the pill that I stopped getting my period. And as, I guess, kind of a naive med student at the time, I was like, that doesn't seem normal. So maybe in retrospect, that's pretty common when you've been on a low-dose pill for a while to not get a period. But anyways, I went to my doctor and I said, I haven't gotten my period in a few months. I know I'm not pregnant. What do we do? And her response was, let's go off the pill and see what happens. And so I did. And 3 months later, I still didn't get my period. And I went back and she's like, well, it could take some time for your period to come back. Let's give it a little bit more time. And this kind of kept happening for a year and a half. And I didn't get a period.
Right.
At which point I was like, that seems very abnormal.
Were you
to
worried?
me.
Or were you just so busy in school?
I think I was worried, but I don't think I really like wanted to take the time to figure out what it was. And I think truthfully in the back of my mind, I think I knew that someone was going to tell me, because it was at a point in my life when I was the thinnest I ever was. And I didn't want anyone to tell me that I should gain weight.
Right.
I think that was probably part of it.
Right.
So a combination of like all of those reasons, I didn't really look into it.
Were you just stressed or over-exercising?
I
Or
definitely was not
combination?
stressed. I was very, very, very cautious in what I was eating, but I thought what I was eating was healthy. I felt like I was eating large quantities of healthy foods, but being very restrictive in anything that I didn't think was healthy, and probably over-exercising. So a combination of those two. But I felt good. So,
Yes.
and I liked the way that I looked, and I didn't really want to change that until I was in a situation where I was in a new relationship and, going to be sexually active, and thought, well, I should probably do something from a contraception perspective, and I should also sort of know what's going on with my body. I'm not going to go back on contraception until I know why I haven't gotten a period for 15 months.
That's very responsible of you.
I thought so.
Yeah. I was like, I like that was your thought process, though.
Yeah. Well, I was like, the pill, in my head, I was like, maybe the pill is what caused this. And so I don't want to go back on it until we figure out why. So at that time, I went back to the doctor. I was like, hey, this has been like 15 months and I really don't think this is normal. I think maybe at that point I was a little bit more confident in my own medical knowledge to know that was A, not normal, but B, also like not safe from a, endometrial lining buildup perspective. And so at that point, she agreed to send me to, I can't remember if it was an endocrinologist or a gynecologist. I think it was a gynecologist. And so I went and they did some blood work and they did an ultrasound and nothing came back that abnormal. They were like, well, it could be PCOS, because I think on one ultrasound I had a large number of follicles, or it could be this hypothalamic amenorrhea, which can happen in people whose BMI is low. But we're not really concerned. If you want something for contraception, go back on the pill. And whenever you're ready to have kids, you might need a little bit of help. So just like be aware of that. And at the time I was like, okay.
Did they have you do like a challenge, like the Provera?
I did do a challenge and I had a withdrawal bleed. And then I went back on the pill as soon as that was done.
Is it like a substantial amount?
No, and my lining was not that thick.
Right, from your ultrasound.
Which makes me think maybe more it was like a low estrogen.
Hypothalamic amenorrhea situation.
Yeah.
From that perspective, just because I get a lot of patients who are concerned regularly about the pill and ramifications around the pill. And my attitude about the pill is I don't feel one way or the other about it. Just very much like whatever is appropriate for you. But I know some practitioners, specifically more probably in my field, in the alternative health field, are very anti-pill. I think one woman even wrote a book about it, specifically about how bad the pill was, just
From
generally.
what perspective?
Oh, it's filled with all sorts of useful information about how evil the pill is and how it can increase your risk of everything. But my argument was always like, oh, well, if, it can decrease your risk of like ovarian cancer, for example. And like a progestin pill is very helpful for an endometriosis patient. But that's never very well received, mostly because I think people come to acupuncturists
to stay away from
the pill. So my agreeing that it might be useful is not necessarily their favorite opinion.
That's interesting.
But from your perspective of how you were looking at it as maybe the pill caused this, was it like in a post-pill PCOS capacity, or was it?
I don't know if I had a very concrete thought of it. I think I was just like, I think my periods were normal before I went on the pill, other than, having some cramps, but I don't ever recall having anything so debilitating that I was worried about endometriosis or anything like that. It was more just as a teenager, having cramps once a month was not enjoyable, and it seemed like an easy decision to go on the pill. But then when I had been on it for so long and all of a sudden I stopped getting a period, it didn't make sense to me why after, 10 years, all of a sudden that would change. Because in my mind, the change from being on the pill would probably happen sooner than that. And so, what was this doing to my body that was making this happen? But then I guess when I went off of it and I still didn't get my period for so long, I definitely went back to that thought of, is it because my BMI is too low?
Did you have to do more challenges after that first progesterone challenge?
I went right back on the pill after it, and I got a regular period.
Right. Oh, good.
I mean, period's not really the right word, but
right.
A
regular withdrawal.
Yeah.
That's so good, though, that it was able to kickstart again.
Yeah. So I still don't really know. To me, that doesn't even necessarily make sense. If it was a low estrogen state, but going back on a low dose pill, is that all of a sudden going to make me have a regular bleed? Is it just that my lining had built up enough in that period of time that there was something to shed each month, even though the ultrasound didn't really show that thick of a lining? It still doesn't really physiologically make sense to me, but I didn't really think about it. I just went back on it and everything was fine, and I really had no side effects from it. It was a very benign thing for me to be taking.
So then when you started your journey towards parenthood, how did that shift in terms of your attitude towards the pill and how everything was following thereafter?
Yeah. I mean, I stayed on the pill until my husband and I, which was a different partner from the first one, so I had to sort of explain to him what my, history had been, and from a contraception perspective, wanting to stay on the pill until we were ready to get pregnant, but also being mindful of having been told that, I don't know, maybe it will take 15 months for me to get a period again. And I'm a very, very, very impatient person. And I wasn't really prepared to wait that long. It was a balancing act between him and I of what our timeline was, and me wanting to go off of it, a month or two before we agreed to start trying to see what would happen. But I also wasn't really willing to wait much longer than that to see if things would normalize on their own.
So you were fully prepared to just hop on down to the fertility center before even anything else.
Yeah. And then that's exactly what I did. I mean, I not luckily, I don't know, but I mean, being a physician and working in the field of women's health, I have some of the connections, and I think right around the time, or even maybe a month before I planned to stop the pill, I reached out to a colleague of mine and was like, this is my history. We want to start trying. I'm not patient. What do we do?
And how can I become your patient?
Yes, exactly. And it was very easy. She just said, go off the pill when you're ready, give it a month, and we'll do some tests. Okay. Seems easy enough. So that's what we did. And I think I had a bit of a longer than a 28-day cycle, but nothing that significant. I think maybe a 35 or 36-day cycle, which is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But still, my impatience in all of this, and the fear that maybe that was just one good quick period after coming off the pill, and then it was going to be 3 months again. I was even though, I did blood work, I did an ultrasound, I did a sonohystogram, my husband did a semen analysis, and everything came back pretty much fine. But she was like, but, if you want some like extra reassurance, we can do an IUI. And I was like, sure, sounds great.
Sounds quick.
Yeah, I like this. This just like ensures that we're covering all of our bases. And I guess at the time it was COVID. So at least at the clinic that I was at, it was fairly non-invasive. It was not a medicated cycle. There was no cycle monitoring because they weren't doing that unless you really needed to. So it was home LH monitoring. Let us know when you get a positive LH. You'll do a trigger shot. You'll come in the next day. So it seemed like pretty minimal. I didn't require a lot of time. It didn't require any medication. It didn't require any intervention. And it just gave me a little bit of reassurance that we were doing something, even though relative to what the potential problem was, it doesn't really make sense that this was what the solution was. But okay.
I feel like it's a good start. Like, it was like I don't think anyone now does any IUIs unless they're medicated.
Yeah.
So like starting with just like an IUI when you're already ovulating.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a great choice.
Yeah. I was fine with it. And I didn't have to convince my husband to do it because there was really, we could try and we could do this and hopefully maximize our chances. So we did our first IUI. It was a chemical pregnancy, which was disappointing, but I had to remind myself that I counsel women all the time that it can take a few months to get pregnant. And this was literally our first attempt ever. And we were going to try again. And we did our second IUI and I got pregnant and had, besides a horrible kidney stone, a very uncomplicated pregnancy.
You gave birth to a child and a kidney stone.
And a kidney stone. The kidney stone came first.
Right. But then what shifted between that very like uncomplicated first easy pregnancy to then wanting to come and see the witch doctor?
Yeah, the witch doctor who I had to like get in touch with my famous Everything Delish patient and be like, can you get me in to see her? Yeah, she's like, I will use my pass for you.
That was actually pretty, she was like, I have a massive favor. I was like, tell me, what organ do you want? I'm ready. She was like, no, nothing like that. I have a friend who wants to come see you. I was like, yeah, okay, great. Yeah.
Come on in.
Can't wait. She was like, by the way, she's a doctor. I was like, hypochondriac and getting to meet yet another doctor? Yes.
Lucky.
Sign me up.
Yeah. And you got me in very quickly. But there was a little bit more, I guess, before I saw you.
There was, yes.
So I guess my son was born. He was 10 months and we decided that we were ready. Again, my like impatience and fear of something not going right. I was like, I don't feel the need to wait. Like, let's see. Let's start this. And because the IUI essentially worked almost perfectly the first time, we, again, just like decided we were going to jump right back into the same plan. But we'd moved and we no longer were in a location convenient for the old clinic that we were at. So I got a referral to a clinic near me and explained the story. And that doctor was like, okay, cool. Let's do the same thing. We didn't really do any tests at that time. I don't know, maybe some like basic blood work and an ultrasound. But he was just like, doesn't really seem like there was anything that significant, but if this is the route that like you're comfortable with, like I'm supportive of it. And the only thing that he had said was like, but like, let's do it with letrozole. And I was like, is that really necessary? Like, we didn't do that the first time and I didn't need it. And to be honest, I wasn't that worried about the risk of multiples. I have always wanted twins. So I was like, if it happens, it happens. My husband, not so much. But it was more just like, I don't need to be medicated if I don't need to be. And so he's like, I think, partly because I am a physician and he could speak to me, you know, medically and explain to me what his rationale was. But he was like, but if ultimately you want to like sort of guide your own care and try without it, I'm fine with that. So that's what we did. And the protocol was very different than what I had done previously. And I'm sure it was a factor both of different clinics, but also of COVID times and not COVID times. And so there was a lot more cycle monitoring. There was the recommendation to trigger before I got an LH surge. So like a day or two probably before I would have surged. And right off the bat, that just totally threw me off. Because in my head, I was like, oh, what if this follicle's not ready yet?
Right.
And he was like, it is. Like, this is how we do it. It's fine. And I think my mindset kind of just completely shifted. And I was like, something about this just doesn't sit right with me. And it's not going to work. I mean, I know now that like that's probably how most clinics do operate by, you know, monitoring follicular development and hormone levels and sort of dictating when a patient is going to ovulate and get them to take a trigger shot. But to me, it just felt forced and unnatural, and therefore maybe was going to be the reason that it didn't work.
Which is so interesting because I do feel as though most patients who aren't doctors are so jazzed
Yes,
to take as much medication as possible.
it's true.
And here you are.
Or to like have someone tell
to-
them that like this is the right time and do it. And I don't know if maybe that had been the way that it was done the first time around, if I would have questioned it as much.
Because you would have thought, okay, that's what
how
works
it's
for us.
Yeah, and that's how it's done. But I think also in my head, I was like, but there's still the potential that this follicle could develop more and become more mature. I didn't really think of the concept of over mature because if your body is, you know, doing it on its own, it's unlikely to be over mature. So like, why not let this happen when it's supposed to happen and just like do the IUI at that time? So I think really right from the start this time around, something every cycle, and like there were a few cycles after this, something threw me off with the way that the protocol was, and it really affected my like psyche in all of this.
From like believing that you could to believing this might be hard.
Yeah. And like if we did it a little bit differently, would it be more successful? I don't know if it would or wouldn't have, but I definitely felt like I was questioning things a lot more this time around, and that made me unsettled. But I also like wanted to sort of trust in the physician who I was seeing because he is more of an expert in the field than I am. And, you know, I wanted to believe that what he was recommending was the right course of action and didn't want to question him too much and be that annoying, like, doctor patient.
It's interesting. I do feel like the physicians that I treat are less likely to ask questions of their fertility doctor because they, like in their own arena, they know what they're doing. They have taken all things into consideration and like made very careful decisions, and like it's not very cookie cutter. It's very much like patient by patient.
Yeah.
And then when they're thrown into the fertility world, it feels as though that's less the case. But it takes a bit of time, I think.
Yeah.
To sort of have that percolate and become a realization like, oh, this isn't like other fields.
Right. And I think I questioned it to try to understand it, but was always like in the moment comforted by whatever the response was. And then if I thought back on it afterwards, I was like, maybe that doesn't make as much sense as I thought, or the exact opposite. I would try to rationalize it and be like, they know more than me, so whatever I'm thinking is probably not. I think I was just like all over the place. And my thoughts were all over the place. I could speak to one person and feel one thing and speak to someone else and have a different thought. And I think it all really just stemmed from like my fears that this wasn't going to happen.
Really interesting, like the place that fear will take people. I don't know. I definitely think of like my physicians and then the doctors that I know in like a very unfair way. Like, I assume you guys are all geniuses without fears of anything.
Yeah, no.
And that you don't have any like irrational concerns. Like, I remember
I definitely have
I will,
irrational
like,
concerns.
the first time I had this internist patient, and she is a genius. And she was like, Anne, I need you to comfort me on something. I was like, yeah, okay. Like, okay. Like, I don't know how I could possibly comfort you.
In lots of ways.
She was like, I was on a forum. And I was like a medical forum? She was like, no. Like a Reddit forum. And I was reading through it, and this woman had the following concern. I was like, you absolutely need to get off of those.
Terrible.
I was like, what are you even doing on that? She was like, I don't even know.
Because your mind can go to these crazy places.
Yeah.
It's irrational fears. And when it's something that's like so important to you and something that you want so badly, you go looking for all of this. You go down these rabbit holes. And even if you know logically, you can't rationalize it.
Like, maybe this will be the one thing. Maybe I will find something on this insane Reddit forum this will be the answer for me.
If only it were that straightforward.
So in terms of like your concerns and then your mindset shifting, how did you feel like that redirected the way that you were proceeding?
So we ended up doing, I think, 3 IUIs before we really sort of reevaluated what we were. 2 IUIs unmedicated that were unsuccessful. And then the fertility doctor said, I think we should try the letrozole next cycle. And I think at that point, because even though it had only been 2 months, it was longer than it had been the first time. I was like, well, something's different. Like, let's try something different. And so we did 2 more. So first he told me, let's do 1 more IUI. And then when that did not work, during our follow-up appointment after that, he said, okay, I think we need to start talking about IVF. We usually do 3 cycles, and if it doesn't work, then we move on to IVF. And really, at least from like the way it was articulated, my husband was the one that was more like, whoa. Like, what are we doing here? We've been trying this for 3 months. It's not like we had been trying for a year and then went to the fertility clinic and did 3 more months and it wasn't working. Like, this was 3 months. Is that really necessary? And his response was, well, it worked for you guys in the past, so like I'd be open to a 4th cycle, but like really that's where I would stop. And I think I was torn because like most people, I think I felt like IVF is like the be all and end all, and like should guarantee you a baby, but 2, if it doesn't work, like what's next? Like, what are my options after that? It like seemed like a dead end. And I think I was scared to take that step, fearing that it would not work and then being an even worse off. So we went forward with the 4th IUI, and that one was a chemical pregnancy. And so again, the recommendation was, let's move forward with IVF. And we had the same conversations and the same hesitation. And I was like, but we also like haven't really investigated much this time around. Like, maybe something has changed with my lining or my AMH or my husband's sperm, like something. Like, before we decide that we're going to proceed automatically with starting an IVF cycle, maybe we should look into this. And he was a bit hesitant. He's like, I don't know that that's going to change the recommendation, but like, if you want to, I'm open to it.
Wouldn't it be required to know that information to even properly dose?
I would think so.
Your IVF cycle?
Yeah, it was very weird to me that we were just like going to jump in. Like, he'd already started talking about like a protocol.
Insane.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So, and I was like, it just seemed like it was very overwhelming. It was consuming my life. But I was like, I want to do these tests. And I think those tests, even though I was the one that asked for them, is really what made me spiral, because we checked all the things and everything looked good and fine. The only thing that really had changed from 2 years before was my AMH, which went from like above normal for someone my age,
right,
to what I thought was very low. But when I came and told you my number, you basically laughed at me and said, I'm not really that worried about this.
That makes me sound insane.
Oh, but you
I
were
did,
right.
though. I
You were
did
like,
laugh.
and your problem with that is,
You said go on.
yeah,
Yes.
so, but to me, that just like changed everything. And I was like, well, if we're going to need to do IVF at some point, like I need to do it now before we get to a place where like it's even less successful. And a lot of this, again, was like the impatience in me. I was like, I want to be pregnant yesterday. So we decided that we were going to go for it. And for multiple reasons, we ended up switching back to the old clinic that we were at. And well, I had gotten a second opinion from them because I had that relationship already. And they were also in agreement that like IVF is what you need to do. And so now we were like, well, we have 2 fertility doctors telling us the same thing. I guess that's what we should do.
Mm-hmm.
So we set up for a retrieval. And I mean, I knew, and they had warned me that, you know, this was probably not going to be a retrieval where we got 20 eggs or 15 eggs. You know, my AMH was in their mind low, in your mind not that low, but still not 15 or 20. And that was hard to accept because, you know, you're going through this whole process and they're already, before you even start, kind of preparing you that you'll probably need to do more than one cycle to get an adequate number of eggs to be successful.
Right. For fertility math's sake.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that you have to make these decisions of, do you want to do PGT testing on your embryos, or do you want to bank them and do a second retrieval and then do all the testing together when you have like a bulk of embryos? But you have to make that decision before you even know how many eggs or embryos you're going to get. But already it was sort of like, you're going to need at least 2 retrievals to get a reasonable number.
I honestly, I hate when patients batch. Because especially if you've never done a retrieval before and you don't, everybody will respond differently to any given protocol. So you're doing one protocol and you get a certain number of embryos. And then without knowing the quality of those embryos are then going to do the same protocol.
Right.
But you don't know if it was successful the first time. You're going to do the same thing a second time. So instead of having such a gamble.
Yeah, you have no clue. You're rolling the dice.
And it blows my mind that that's so popular.
For me and my husband, who are both very scientific-minded, mathematical people, you should have seen the like flow charts we had going of like, this could be what happened, or this could be what happened, and this is what we're going to decide. And like, obviously there's no way to know.
Yeah, you could either win big or lose it all.
Yeah.
And you just don't assume in any type of like medical scenario that involves fertility that there is that other option of like losing it all.
Yeah.
Like IVF is your guarantee.
Yeah.
So
the naive thought.
Yeah.
So we went through the retrieval process. Well, I did my stims and it actually looked like it was going pretty well. I was getting, reasonable reassurance that mostly that my estrogen levels were rising so well that like we're probably going to get a good number of eggs. And it was really, I think, only in the day or two before the actual retrieval that I was starting to feel optimistic and, okay, maybe this is what's going to work and it's going to be fine. So I went in for the retrieval and I came out and they tell you before you leave how many eggs you get. And there were 6. And I was just like heartbroken because I had just in the 48 hours before that convinced myself that maybe we were going to get over 10. And now we're at 6.
Right.
And I know like how it drops off at every step along the way. So I'm like, we're not going to end up with very much from this.
Right.
And we ended up with nothing.
So you went from your 6 eggs.
Yeah, I think 3 fertilized.
3 fertilized.
And there were 0 5-day blasts.
Did any make it to day 3?
Yes. I think the 3 did.
Okay.
And then something happened between day 3 and day 5.
So 6 to 0.
And I was like, well, we're not having another baby.
Right.
That is 100% where my mind went. And there wasn't a good explanation as to why that happened, other than, maybe your egg quality is not so good. But that the only way to know for sure if this was just like a one-off or if it was like a global egg quality issue was to do another retrieval.
Did they test like DNA frag when they were?
No.
When
I
they did your
asked a few
husband's DNA
times
analysis?
and we were told it didn't. It wasn't necessary.
Makes me
I know.
so angry. Just because, science neglecting other science doesn't make much scientific sense.
Yeah.
And so the idea of using ICSI with potentially fragmented sperm
doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I get, we were happy to pay for it. Like we were wanting to do it. The only hesitation I had with it, again, is just that it was going to take time. Like, if we're going to do this, we may as well pause whatever we're doing for the few weeks until we get the results back to know how to proceed. And so that maybe meant skipping a cycle of doing something.
Right.
But I mean, otherwise we were happy to do what needed to be done to do it. But it didn't seem like there was much emphasis put on that.
Right.
And again, it was like, yeah, if you really want to, we can. And I'm sure we would have ended up doing that, but then I came to see you and we can get to all that, but we didn't end up getting that far, really. But in that moment of, no embryos and we should try this again, it didn't make sense to me why we were trying this again if it didn't work at all. Like, it can't get much worse than 0 blasts. You can't go less than 0.
But it's also like so hard because when even, let's say at that point that you had come and I'd been able to look over your numbers, I would have told you from your high estrogen level, like, oh, I'm sure that you're going to get, 1,000 estrogen per egg.
Yeah. And
Like,
that's
so
what they
if
said.
you-
And my estrogen was 22,000.
Right. So I would have
So we'd
guessed
expect more than
at
6
least
eggs.
over 10.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the harder parts, was that there wasn't a good explanation as to where that estrogen came from, if not from eggs.
Yeah.
And I still don't really have an answer.
And this is now a mystery podcast.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know.
So, once, coming down from that, like, I'm never going to have another child, to like now problem solving mode.
Yeah.
How did that go? Like, what was the trajectory there?
I mean, I was pretty down for a few days after we got the report of the blast. And I guess in that period of time, my family, who's wonderful, I have 2 younger sisters, I guess, kind of were discussing, and separately, but sort of together, like, both of my sisters came to me and said, like, if you need eggs, like, we, at various timelines, because they were at different points in their life, like, we would be happy to look into being donor eggs or providing you with eggs. whatever the right terminology is. And so like somehow that like gave me a little bit of comfort. I mean, I was so grateful to even like have that option, but it's still, you know, in a very short period of time, like we're talking January to May, thinking we're going to like start this process and get pregnant easily to I'm looking at donor eggs seemed like a really wide, huge jump.
Over 5 months.
Yeah, over a pretty short period of time.
Especially given you had a child like 15 months ago.
Yeah. It was just like, it was all happening so fast. And to be fair, I mean, I was the one that put the donor egg thing on the table because my fear of we tried IVF and that didn't work. Like, what else are we going to do? And there were some like reasons that we kind of needed to decide what route we were going to go based on their individual timelines, my sisters. So we had follow-up appointments with both of the fertility clinics that we had been working with over the years just to get some different opinions. That's when I reached out to Jamie and she set me up with you. And I think I spoke to like one fertility doctor on the Monday. I saw you on a Tuesday and saw the other fertility doctor on the Wednesday. And honestly was just so confused by Wednesday afternoon of like what to do. But I mean, I remember coming here and sitting and telling you my story and really talking about the AMH levels, which you were not worried about, and B, mentioning the donor eggs and like the timeline of needing to decide sort of what route we were going. And you were like, we are not using your sister's eggs. We do not need them. It's very nice that they have offered them, but
That's
we
cute.
don't need them. And I wanted to believe you, but I don't know if I did.
That's fair. It was a first meeting.
And I mean, we've talked about this, like, I am such a medical scientific person and really knew nothing about any of the other approaches to fertility through naturopathic care, acupuncture, even though I will say definitely both fertility clinics did suggest, you know, seeking that type of care.
Right.
Which I, you know, thought was interesting because I'd never really experienced that before. But to know that they put emphasis on it in some way was interesting to me, and you know, definitely something that I've adopted into my practice and like talking to patients over the years, because it's truthfully something I really didn't know anything about. I mean, I really didn't need to know about it because I didn't have to go through it until now, but I really didn't know very much about it. But I was like, everyone speaks so highly of you, and I went down a rabbit hole and looked at your entire Instagram. And I think it was at that time that you were posting like the fertility stories, and I just like found them so inspiring. And I was like, this person like seems to care so much and has all of these like wonderful individualized ideas. Like maybe I should stray from the medical side of this and look at this from another perspective. Because I was like, I don't know really what else to do. I didn't feel in my heart that doing another retrieval at that time made sense.
Yeah, I think, I mean, even when, because I definitely for your plan, like gave statistics and articles for like any recommendation.
For both me and my husband. I was like, we need the science.
That was exactly it. And I also knew that you were going to, like, I'm friendly with one of the doctors that you're seeing. And so I knew that you were going to share the plan with him. And I knew he would want to know why you were doing what and like why I had, you know, X, Y, and Z opinions about what protocol you might follow.
Yeah.
And so providing the science, it's interesting. Like, I always think about this from this like paradigm shift of like, I, as just a human being, think of myself as like entirely inadequate, just starting from zero.
Ridiculous.
No, but from like a health standpoint, like I feel like if I didn't take pretty good care of myself, I would just fall apart. Like I might even just dissolve. Like I have no faith in what holds me together. And so I have become reliant on like supplementation, and like acupuncture, exercise, like getting a certain amount of sleep, definitely caffeine, like fluid in a certain amount per day. And so I'm always so curious when a patient comes in and they're like, "No, I don't take any supplements." And I'm like, "And you just trust that your body is just going to keep just doing its thing."
And that's really what I thought. I mean, I admittedly took a prenatal vitamin from Shoppers for my entire first pregnancy and didn't really look at what was in it.
Yeah. But that perspective actually helped me a lot because it gave me more faith in potentially what I was working with.
You were starting with really nothing.
I was like, well, okay, if
you could make a big difference here.
I was like, what do you mean this is what we're starting with? And you were like, no, I don't, what's CoQ10?
Yeah.
Like, why would I use that? And I was like, okay, let's go.
You're going to teach me lots of things.
No, it was so, but you were in like pretty decent health.
Yeah. And that's why I've never, other than my kidney stone, I've never really had any issues.
Like seeing you so put together gave me faith that like even if I wanted to stop taking my supplements, like maybe I wouldn't die.
You wouldn't die, but maybe you wouldn't feel as good as you do.
Great. But you don't think I would immediately just perish?
I don't think you would just like disintegrate.
Right.
No.
Well, that actually gives me a lot of comfort. Yeah. Okay. So then we have a plan.
Yeah. So basically you said, we don't need your sister's eggs.
Yeah.
We're going to do this. You were all for doing this with IUIs, just so we had, I guess, a little bit more control over things. You were not a big proponent of the letrozole.
It seemed to be where things went sideways.
Yeah, it just didn't seem to make sense. Like, I mean,
for you,
maybe at some point there was a question of a diagnosis of PCOS, but that was definitely not where we were at now. And my cycles were relatively regular.
Anecdotally, I see patients have success with letrozole who have like very stubborn PCOS and they're not cycling. Or interestingly, on the other end of the spectrum, like patients who have very low AMH. And
which mine was not, apparently.
No, yours was not. Like diminished ovarian reserve. Like I'm always very surprised that it works on either end.
On either end of
but not really in the middle. And I can't really explain the DOR, like why it would work so well in that perspective. I don't know, maybe in the not converting the testosterone to estrogen and then requiring the body to create its own FSH. It has some regulatory effect on FSH. I don't know. But that's sort of what I've sort of gone through in my own brain. But I don't know why it wouldn't then work well for just a regular patient.
Middle.
Like I see thinning of lining and like irregular cycles after.
Yeah. And the way you described it to me was really helpful because you were like, it's forcing your body to work harder than it needs to.
Right.
And so that was why your recommendation was if we were going to do this medicated, we should be using like an FSH stim, a low dose where we're trying to achieve the same thing, maybe get the growth of more than one follicle per cycle, because maybe we need those few so that hopefully, one of them is good. But why make your body work harder to produce the FSH to then produce the estrogen? Let's just give your body the FSH so it can do its thing.
Yes.
And that was interesting and made sense to me. And luckily, when I took that back to both fertility doctors, they said, that makes sense. And, it's not necessarily our traditional approach, though I have heard of several patients since then who have been treated that way. So maybe it's becoming
starting a trend.
Yeah, maybe. But they did just caution that the risk of multiples is higher, and that was a risk that we were willing to take and prepared to cancel a cycle if there really were 4 or 5 whatever follicles developing. So that's what we did.
That's what you did.
And I did my IUI, and I think I came the next week for a session, and you asked me how I was feeling, and I was like, well, I don't know. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I got like a bit emotional. And you were like, oh, well, the criers, they're always pregnant.
That is the tell.
And I was like, I'm always emotional, so I don't know. I don't know if this is it, but I hope you're right.
You did have one unique symptom.
My left boob tenderness. Yes. That I think was the telling symptom for me. So when I was pregnant with my son, my left boob was so tender. And I think we checked my progesterone levels a week after my IUI, and they were very good. And in my head, I was like, if I'm not pregnant, then these levels are going to start to decline, and my left boob soreness should start to go away. And it didn't. And so I actually don't think that I really admitted this to anyone because I was scared to be wrong, but I felt somewhat confident taking that pregnancy test on day 13 before I went to the clinic for my blood test.
Right.
I don't know why, or I mean, I guess I know what made me think that, but I didn't really believe it, and I was kind of waiting to be very disappointed. But in the few days leading up to that, I definitely convinced myself that this was like very possibly going to be positive. And it was.
That is the sweetest, most scientific way of expressing happiness I have ever heard. I quite possibly could have been wrong. My hypothesis potentially was incorrect, that the HCG was in fact there.
Yeah.
The pregnancy test was positive.
It was.
That was very climactic.
I think we'd met, like 2 weeks before that?
Yeah. No.
3 weeks? No. No. But not more than a month.
No.
Because I came here.
Yep.
I think it was like 10 or 12 days after my retrieval. And I said to you, when am I going to get my period? And you're like, well, that's what we're going to
do
today. And 2 days later, I got it.
Poof.
Yeah. It just appeared. To be honest, I was like a bit skeptical because it was like late in the day, 2 days later, and it still hadn't come. And I was like, I don't know.
You're like, this witch.
Her witchy stuff didn't work on me.
Smoke and no action.
And then it came. And so it was, I guess, 4 weeks later.
Yeah. There you go.
And
I make no promises. That's not normally the trajectory. And here's
I felt very, very fortunate and grateful. I really didn't. I couldn't believe it. I was like, after, you hear these stories, and first you don't want to discount your own stories, and you don't want to minimize other people's stories. But I think I kind of felt like we'd only been doing this for, at that point it was July. So it was like 6-7 months. And when you listen to all these other stories, they go on for years. And I kind of felt like, why did I get so lucky that it didn't take that long? We just maybe needed to like reframe what the actual issue was, if there even really was an issue to begin with, because I don't know if there was or what there was.
This is the thing, is like the importance of, I think it's really important to emphasize that people want to be in one camp or the other. You're either like pro IVF or you're anti IVF.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be either. You need to be flexible.
Yeah.
And so looking at each patient and the challenges that they are facing, and then taking into account certain things like, hey, when you did your IVF retrieval, your hormone levels were very good. But then the way that your eggs responded to the stems and the retrieval process was not very good.
Definitely.
So why would you continue doing the same thing that didn't work again and again? And a conversation I regularly get into and have to continually emphasize, like my support of IVF, is when I am telling patients who have done IVF and it has not worked. I'm like, this is not because I'm anti-IVF. This is because IVF is not appropriate for you.
Right. And I think that that's a big thing that's not necessarily explained in the fertility world. People just think that IVF is the answer to everything because it is so medically and technologically advanced that it must be the best.
Yeah.
And it works wonderfully for some people. You hear the stories, and those people, are so thankful for that technology and maybe wouldn't get the chance to have the family they want without it. But it was really like an eye-opener for me to take a step back almost medically and have that be ultimately what led to success.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the big lesson that I took away from this. And, what I've tried to, talk to patients about it's definitely given me a different perspective on it, but in both ways, because, from a medical perspective, we're taught, anyone under the age of 30 or 35, like they need a year. And if they don't get pregnant, then you need to look into it. But going through some of it myself, you have an appreciation for being 4 or 5 months in and not being successful and what that feels like. And what are some things without jumping right to fertility clinic or IVF that we can do to try to optimize it so that if we try all those things and there really is some underlying issue that, we can know that we've tried some other things and do some of the more invasive interventions if we need to, because there's obviously a role for it in the appropriate setting.
Scenario, yeah. I do think it's interesting. Like I have another patient who's also a physician, and she did 3 rounds of IVF, ended up retrieving over the 27 eggs.
Dream.
No embryos. Like 0 blasts. So, and she came to me sort of in the same state of like, well, that what I thought was going to work did not work. So now I am left with you. And
unfortunately, I have
we are. And when I was graduating her like 2 weeks ago now, because she got to 12 weeks with like a healthy little human. I almost like just spilled what the sex is. This is why I can't have secrets. She said to me, like, I've been cautioning like friends and colleagues of mine who say, well, I don't need to worry about my fertility. When I'm ready, I'll just go do IVF.
Yeah.
And she's like, because it's not necessarily going to be what's going to get you the outcome that you want. So,
not to mention like the physical and emotional toll of just going through that process, whether it's what you need or don't need, or what's going to work for you or not. It's a process. It's a time commitment. It's a mental commitment. It's a financial commitment.
Yes. I think that like having you on here really like gives a lot of validation to the conversation about like medically sometimes the best process forward is actually taking a step back.
Yeah. I think you need to look at the whole picture. You need to look at what the potential issues are and what's going to actually address those issues. And that can look like a lot of different things.